And we move into the next item on the agenda, item 5. And now, Jan, would you please present the financial report from the board?
Thank you, Kim, President and members. Good morning. This is the finance report of the board. You will be asked next in the meeting to approve the statutory financial statements for the year ended 31st December 2018. These financial statements have been available since the council meeting in May 2019, but formal approval happens now at the annual meeting. I would, however, like to report on more current financial information and the outlook for 2020 and the Quad in this report. I'll begin with the forecast current year performance, which is the result for the year of 8 months, plus the forecast for the 4 months through to December 2019. The deficit for 2019 before foreign currency fluctuations and taxation is £2.3 million, representing a significant improvement on the prior year's result of a deficit of £4.7 million, some 51% reduction. It is completely normal to run deficits through each Quad, as the Olympic income is received at the end of the previous Quad, in this case 2016. This receipt funds our programs for the following 4 years. There are a number of factors contributing to the 2019 improved income. The reduction reflects the focus on improving world sailing revenue performance, as well as managing our costs effectively. Dealing first with the revenue. Overall, total revenue has increased by some 12% to £3.69 million in 2019. This increase was particularly pleasing as there was a significant one-off revenue item in 2018. The event income in 2018 included £925,000 of non-recurring revenue from the Aarhus 2018 Hempel World Championship. As you know, these worlds happen once every 4 years. Event income has remained strong, however, in 2019 at £988,000. This new revenue reflects sanction fees from existing and some new special events, such as the 36th America's Cup, the Ocean Race, Star Sailors League, and Sail GP. Other commercial income from sponsorship grew in the current year, both in the cash we receive and the goods and services supplied by sponsors free of charge. This is known as value in kind. Contracted cash sponsorships delivered a 91.4% increase over 2018, and value in kind a 13% increase to deliver a total value of £1.996 million. I could have rounded it up to £2 million, but it's 1.996. While there have been changes in the sponsors in this year, notably Volvo ending their commercial relationship with World Sailing following the sale of the Volvo Round the World race, other new major sponsors have committed to World Sailing for multi-year terms. Our cost base continues to be examined to identify areas where we can improve efficiency and savings. Total costs you will see in 2019 were £5.98 million, a 13.2% reduction from the previous year's costs, and this is after taking out of those costs the Aarhus World direct costs of £930,000. Savings were made across all areas of the organisation from those incurred in the 2018 year. Some of the significant decreases were in the costs of governance. This category includes costs of these member meetings, both annual and mid-year, board meetings and committee expenses, which do include the Governance Commission. The total expense in this category dropped by £418,000, directly relating to the cost of member meetings, which reduced from $600,000 to $314,000 in the current period. The costs of committees, including the Governance Commission, fell from $185,000 to $122,000. Other areas of savings have been in the direct costs relating to activities and other administration costs. If I now move to the overall forecast for the current four-year cycle, this four-year cycle has seen a period of much-needed investments in infrastructure for world sailing that should not need to be repeated for another decade. Some history. The lease for the offices in Southampton ended in July 2017 after some 20 years, with the landlord of the property wishing to redevelop it. The board had no options but to relocate the office, and within a time frame of around 7 months. The board conducted a full investigation of 6 alternative locations for the world sailing offices. The lease in Southampton was a grandfathered low rent, and any move was going to increase the costs and potentially impact the ongoing commitment of staff. The board reviewed the financial and the non-financial impact of each proposed location and determined that relocation to London offered the best expected overall outcome for world sailing. This relocation cost us £1.1 million, including CapEx. We have also spent money in this quad on other long-term investments, such as the initial phase of the digital replatforming of $300,000 and the governance reform of some $300,000. This spend has been spread over several years of the quad, but it is an investment in our future. The non-recurring elements above have consumed around £1.7 million of our cash resources in total. It's worth noting that additional legal fees associated with litigation and EU competition law review was incurred of around $200,000 in this 4-year period. Turning now to the outlook for 2020. The outlook for 2020 has been prepared on a very conservative basis and only includes the commercial revenue that is currently contracted with World Sailing and has no provision or estimate for any future additional income that may be gained. In addition, the board has asked the senior management team to review their priorities for the coming year and to challenge the corresponding budgets using a zero-based approach to eliminate any costs that do not contribute to the strategic outcomes for 2020. This does not mean that our programs, which are delivering services to our members, will be cut just to save money. There is a potential for revenue upside from the commercial pipeline and also cost saving over those figures contained in the current 2020 forecast. It is probably worthwhile reflecting at this point on the quadrennial forecast that was presented to Council and to the annual meeting in November 2017. This forecast included £11.7 million of total sponsorship revenue for this quad in cash and VIK. Almost €4 million of the expected cash revenue from a Tier 1 sponsor was terminated just 1 year into the quad out of a 4-year expectation. As you can see from the latest forecast, only $6.9 million of the estimated $11.7 million commercial income has been achieved over the period. Consequently, the World Sailing balance sheet for 2019 reflects the pressure on cash resources at the end of this year. The balance sheet, excluding the World Sailing Investment Trust's assets and liabilities, shows a deficit of net assets of £122,000 and a working capital deficit of £611,000 at the end of 2019. It should be noted, however, that the creditors shown in this balance sheet for 2019 includes revenue received in advance for items such as the 2020 annual conference and rent equalisation provisions of some £760,000 in total. Both of these items will be recognised either as revenue in 2020 or as a reduced expense in future years and are not amounts that we have to pay to creditors. We have presented to you the 2020 cash flow forecast, split by quarters as requested. There are a number of matters to note here. Firstly, a high percentage of our revenue from sponsorship and member fees is received in the first quarter of the financial year. The cash flow forecast is based on the same assumptions as the 2020 forecast income statement and balance sheet. That is, there is no additional commercial income and no further reductions in the cost base. So we believe that this position is a worst-case scenario. Only 90% of the Olympic money is received in the third quarter of 2020, with the remaining 10% of the cash flow deferred until the first quarter of 2021. In May, we noted at Council that we would negotiate a temporary overdraft to cover the expected cash shortfall in the middle of the year before the Olympic money was received. This facility is currently being finalised and is secured on the assets of the World Sailing Investment Trust. The trustees of the trust, Baker Tilly of the Isle of Man, have approved the use of the trust funds to provide this security. As I said, the cash flow indicates the worst case, and this is expected to peak in August 2020 at £1.3 million, 1 month prior to the receipt of the Olympic money. However, as previously noted, the cash flow has been prepared on a conservative basis. The reason the shortfall in cash is arising directly correlates to the £1.7 million we have spent on the non-recurring investments in our future that I have previously mentioned. We are optimistic that the pipeline for sponsors continues to be strong, but we are also realistic that the time from proposal to contract unfortunately continues to be longer than we expected, given the global slowdown. The sponsorship sales income pipeline shows the current proposals with potential supporters of World Sailing. Where the proposals have been made to multiple sponsors in the same category, the amounts have been included in the schedule only once, and the number of prospects on foot noted. Moving now to the World Sailing Investment Trust. We have two portfolios totalling some £2.7 million, which have been invested on a conservative basis. In the current low interest rate environment, the returns on the funds have been flat, but are in line with other funds with a similar risk profile. Thank you for your attention. The report's been quite detailed, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jan. Any questions to the report? John?
Kia ora, President and member NMAs. World Sailing was outspending revenue for the quadrennial out to 2020, and 2018 was a financial disaster. The result was needing to either borrow against the next quadrennium cycle out to 2024 or to raise capital from us as the MNAs. We elected to borrow against the next 21-24 quad cycle. World Sailing will be carrying forward a sizable deficit from the current quadrennial, and 2017 and 2020 costs have already been suppressed, and it's my MNA's response to say that this is unacceptable in terms of a level of service to members. Cost-cutting of service obligations clearly is unsustainable. The practical and sure way to repay the deficit is to raise new revenues. The guaranteed way to achieve revenue growth is to be a more valued Olympic sport partner to the IOC, to earn a greater revenue share of the IOC's Olympic Games sponsor revenues. World Sailing's event and equipment strategies through to 2024 is the one way to raise the appeal of sailing as an Olympic sport. Raise our IOC sponsor revenues, targeting sailing into categories C, B or A as a partner, life-changing for sailing. Financially sound, fair and equitable representation for all our sailors in the room and around the world, and uniting sailing world, the sailing world. Implementing these already planned strategies lift revenue to enable meaning sharing between the Olympic Council and the Participation and Development Council. Recognising our financial vulnerability, please say yes to participation, development and Olympic excellence. Unite sailing, because that's what sailing in the Cook Islands wants to do. Jan, thank you very much for your report. I hope and I believe you do agree. Thank you, President.
Thank you, John. Anybody else wants to? Erik Tulla?
At the, Mr. President, the fellow M&A, at the council meeting 2 days ago, we went through the same presentation, more or less, and there was a request from me to the board for certain documents concerning the loans taken by the enterprise to overcome this cash deficit projected for next fiscal year. And I asked for the also for the lease and a risk analysis that was that I believe Jan mentioned had been performed or something to that effect. For the trust documents, I requested that the actual trust documents be presented and the document constituting a lien. I believe this is the first time that trust, the Isle of Man trust, is being used to finance current expenditures, which was not the stated purpose of the trust. My question is, are those documents available?
Eric, I don't actually believe you did request those documents at the council meeting, but if I deal with your substantive question about the trust, the trustee of the trust, the Baker Tilly corporate trustee, has approved the use of the trust as security for the loan in accordance with their instructions for the trust.
I did request, Mr. President, I did request, and you mentioned specifically, Mr. President, that you would inquire and provide what was available. The whole object of that inquiry had been to confirm that situation, because the information that I have regarding the trust is that it does have limitations, and that's why I want to see the trust itself. It speaks louder than whatever anybody else could have told you. And the same thing with the lease. I was asking questions relative to the penalties for if you wanted to vacate the offices in London. The retort was to the effect that there was a consultation out for that very question that I was asking. A lease is a lease. You can read it and we can see whether or not there is a penalty and what it is. Again, I wonder if I can be informed, did you find any documents responsive to my questioning? And if so, when will they be available?
Eric, when you requested that, that was actually not in the council meeting, because the council meeting was Saturday and Friday and Saturday. So we met informal before the council meeting, and that was when we had this talk. And of course, we also said to you at that time that we are going to receive this document when we have in due time. So that was what was said at that meeting, just to be clear.
You may be right. I don't recall exactly the...
No, I recall it exactly.
Well, that's fine. But nevertheless, the question is there. The appropriate time is now.
That's your judgment. That's not my judgment.
Sir, we're going to take decisions today on which that information would be useful knowledge for the M&As that are around the table to have and to be able to evaluate. Doing it next week isn't going to help any.
We can see what we can get, Eric, but finding a lease is not what we're expecting being here as a document. I think, as we were instructed, that this lease is a 10-year lease, and it has some options in it. And that is what I think this group is also trusting the board to deal with. The other thing concerning the funds, that foundation, that has been answered by Jen. And that's, of course, what's in the document.
If I can just add to that, the trust document is with the trustees of the trust. World Sailing is not the trustee of that trust, and so we can request from the trustees documents, but given that you are asking that question now, obviously it's not going to be available at this meeting. In terms of the lease is a standard commercial lease that is set up for any commercial property rental in London. The amounts are fully disclosed in the financial statements, and it will have some terms in it regarding cancellation, but generally speaking, 10-year commercial leases do not have options for cancellation without penalty.
So that's the answer, there is a penalty.
Well, it's a 10-year lease. Of course there will be a penalty because you've contracted as in a standard lease to a 10-year term.
So the penalty is the balance unpaid on the 10-year.
Well, it would be actually. Yes, it's a contract. So to get out of a contract, you have to negotiate.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Eric, I think it was the same message we gave you last time, but anyway, any other questions to the finances? Croatia?
Yes. Just a short observation on this financial state, which need to be involved in next strategy, because it's a big question. Just short. Olympic income in 4 years is 12 millions pounds or euros, I don't know. And Olympic cost is in 4 years only 800,000 pounds. It's really not nice to see that it's 20 times more income than costs. Something is, for me, is wrong, because Olympic Committee invests in sport, Olympic sport and all sport, sailing, but this show is it's not nice to see. Olympic cost only in 4 years 800,000 euros.
Thank you. Yes, the Olympic funding that is given to World Sailing is spent over the Quad in activities that build sailing's profile. So it's things like the World Cup regattas, it's things like building participation and development in our sport. And so it's the costs that you are talking about are the direct costs of the Olympic Games event itself, not the activities that we undertake in the 4-year period between Olympics to develop the profile of the sport, to provide athletes with opportunities to compete and to grow the grassroots participation in the sport.
Thank you, Jan. Any other ones wants to have questions for? That doesn't seem to. Oh, yeah, to George Bosler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, fellow delegates. Thank you, Jen, for the report. To keep it short and simple, I think that at this period it is very difficult to say that the financial management of our organization is sterling or perfect. If you look at the sheets, to keep it really short and simple, we've already spent £2 million of the projected 12 millions for the next Olympic Quad, and which is starting in 2021. Spending appears to have been out of control, so that we have to borrow money to get through Quad and borrowing from future to pay back the errors. Please correct me if I am not right. Just a short personal comment. In a situation in which our federation is now, financially, and in a situation in which many of our MNEs are, we really don't understand why World Sailing is holding its conferences in the most expensive category hotels around the world. I am not talking about the geographic position of the venue. I am coming from the hotel business and from the MICE business, and I can say that this hotel, for instance, is in a very, very upper category of the hotels who offer MICE services. That results in the problem that here around the table is the minority of, represented from the MNAs, because many MNAs couldn't afford to send a delegate here. So may I recommend that please keep this in mind in the future, that we are not saucer FIFA who can allow in this situation to have very expensive hotels, not speaking about the flights and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for your advice, but also remember that it's the AGM who is deciding on the venues, not the board. Thank you. Anybody else wants to speak to the finances? Andorra, Joseph?
Thank you, Mr. President. These figures were coming from a few years. We've been at several council meetings explaining that we were worried by the tendency that the figures were having. And we're finishing the quad where we must beat in the next income, next Olympic income. I really would appreciate the board come with a financial strategy to redress the situation. This has been asked for a few times already at previous meetings, and we're still going down at every presentation of figures for the quad. So I again urge the board to come with a sustainable proposal to redress the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Anybody else wants to? Okay, we close the subject. Then we have two resolutions now about the auditors, and I'll ask John to take us through those votes.